Greetings. Well, we are in a new major subsection called Preaching and Miracles of Jesus in Capernaum and the surrounding districts. Now, I'm going to do two readings today. The first one, subtext, is Cornelius the centurion. So I guess this is a different guy than Zerubbabel. All right, let's begin. We are Thursday, November 9th, the month of Heshvan 24. This is 30 AD. From Gabara, Jesus went to the estate of the officer Zerubbabel near Capernaum. The two lepers whom at his last visit to Capernaum he had healed here presented themselves to return him thanks. The steward, the domestics, and the cured son of Zerubbabel were also here. They had already been baptized. Jesus taught and cured many sick. In the dusk of the evening, after his disciples had separated and gone to their respective families, Jesus proceeded along the valley of Capernaum to the house of his mother. All the holy women were here assembled, and there was great joy. Mary and the women renewed their petition to Jesus that he would cross to the other side of the lake early next morning, because a committee of the Pharisees was so irritated against him. Jesus calmed their fears. Mary interceded for the sick slave of the centurion Cornelius, who was, she said, a very good man. Although a pagan, he had, through affection for the Jews, built them a synagogue. She begged him likewise to cure the sick, daughter of Jairus, the elder of the synagogue, who lived in a little village not far from Capernaum. Now this might be the Jairus from the Bible. All right, Friday, November 10th. When Jesus next morning with some of the disciples was going to the residence of the pagan officer Cornelius, which stood on a height to the north of Capernaum, he was met in the neighborhood of Peter's house by the two Jews whom Cornelius had once before sent to him. They again begged him to have pity on his servant, for Cornelius, they said, deserved his favor. He was a friend of the Jews and had built them a synagogue, reckoning it at the same time an honor to be allowed to do so. Jesus responded that he was even then on his way to Cornelius's, and he directed them to dispatch a messenger in haste to announce his coming. Before reaching Capernaum, Jesus took, just to the right of the gate, the road running between the city and the ramparts, and passed the hovel of the leper living in the city wall. A short distance farther on brought Cornelius' house in sight. Upon receiving the message sent by Jesus, Cornelius had left it as if to get a glimpse of him. He knelt down, esteemed himself unworthy to approach him or to speak with him personally, hurried off a messenger with these words: "The centurion bids me to say to thee, Lord, I am not worthy that thou shouldst enter under my roof. Speak but one word, and my servant shall be healed. For if I, who am only a humble man dependent upon my superior, say to my servant, do this, do that, and he does it, how much easier will it be for thee to command thy servant to be healed, and that he should be so?" When these words were delivered to Jesus by Cornelius' messenger, he turned to those standing around, saying, "Verily I say unto thee, I have not found such faith in Israel. Know ye then, many shall come from the east and the west, and shall take place with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in heaven. Many of the children of God's kingdom, the Israelites, shall be cast into the exterior darkness, where there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Then turning to the servant of the centurion, he said, "Go, and as thou hast believed, so it be done to thee." The messenger bore the words to the kneeling centurion, who, inclined to the earth, arose and hastened back to the house. As he entered, he encountered his servant, who was coming to meet him, enveloped in a mantle, his head bound in a scarf. He was not a native of the country, as was indicated by his yellowish-brown complexion. Jesus immediately turned back to Capernaum. As he was again passing the leper's hut, the leper himself came out and threw himself down before him. "Lord," he said, "if thou wilt, thou canst make me clean." Jesus replied, "Stretch forth thy hands." He touched them and said, "I will do it. Be thou clean." And the leprosy fell from the man. Jesus commanded him to present himself to the priest for inspection, to make the offering prescribed by the law, to speak to none other of his cure. The man went to the Pharisaical priests and submitted himself to their examination as to whether he was cured or not. They became enraged, examined him rigorously, but were forced to acknowledge him cured. They had so lively a dispute with him that they almost drove him from their presence. Jesus turned off into the street that led into the heart of the city, and for about an hour cured numbers of sick that had been brought together, also some possessed. Most of the sick were lying near a well, around which stood little huts. After that, Jesus, with several of the disciples, left the city and went to a little valley beyond Magdalene, not far from Domna. There they found a public inn, at which were Moroni, the widow of Nain, and the pagan Lais of Nain, and her 2 daughters, Sabia and Athalia. We met Lais before. Both of whom Jesus, when at Meroz, had from a distance delivered from the devil. Moroni, the widow of Nain, now came beseeching Jesus to go to her son Martialis, a boy of 12 years, who was so ill that she feared to find him dead on her return. Jesus told her to go home in peace, that he would follow her, but when, he did not say. Moroni had brought with her presents for the inn. She immediately hurried back home with her servant. She had about 9 hours to travel. She was a wealthy woman and very good, a mother to all the poor children of Nain. Bartholomew also had arrived, bringing with him Joseph, the little son of his widowed sister, perhaps to be baptized. Thomas too was there, and with him Jephthah, the little cured son of Achaeus, the centurion of Gishala. Achaeus himself was not present, but Judas Iscariot had come from Meroz. Lais and her 2 daughters had already embraced Judaism in Nain and renounced idolatry before the Jewish priests. At this ceremony, a kind of baptism was performed by the priests, which, however, consisted only of a sprinkling of water and other purifications. In such cases, the Jews baptized women, but the baptism of Jesus and of John was not conferred upon females before Pentecost. All the future apostles were now in Capernaum, with the exception of Matthias. A great many of Jesus' disciples and relatives, along the latter, many women related to him by blood, were present. Of the number was Mary Heli, Mary's elder sister. Side note, she's her elder sister by 20 years, so she's pretty old at this point. Would have been in her 60s, I think. She was now perhaps 70 years old. Oh, there you go. Yeah, she was perhaps now 70 years old, and together with her second husband, Obed, had come bringing an ass laden with presents to Mary. She dwelt at Jaffa, a little place an hour at most from Nazareth, where Zebedee once lived and where his sons were born. She was greatly rejoiced at seeing again her 3 sons, James, Sadoc, and Eliakim, all disciples of John. This James was as old as Andrew. He is at the same time that with 2 other disciples, Cephas and John, once disputed with Paul on the subject of Jewish circumcision. After Jesus' death, he became a priest and was one of the oldest and most distinguished of the 70 disciples. Later, he accompanied James the Greater to Spain, to the islands, and to Cyprus, and into the idolatrous countries bordering the confines of Judea. Not this James, but James the Less, the son of Alphaeus, and Mary Cleophas, became the first bishop of Jerusalem. So this is the second reading. Subtext: miraculous cures wrought by Jesus, his reasons for teaching in parables. The Pharisees and Sadducees determined to oppose Jesus today in the synagogue. They had laid their plans and bribed the people to raise a tumult in which Jesus was to be formally thrust out of the edifice or taken prisoner. But the affair turned out quite differently. Jesus commenced his teaching in the synagogue by a very vigorous address, like one having power and authority to speak. The rage of the exasperated Pharisees increased at each moment. It was about to be let loose upon him when suddenly a great disturbance arose in the synagogue. A man belonging to the city and possessed by the devil, and who on account of his madness had been fast-bound, had, while his keepers were in the synagogue, broken his bonds. He came plunging like a fury into the synagogue, and with frightful cries pressed his way through the people, whom he tossed right and left, who also began to utter screams of terror. He ran straight to the spot where Jesus was teaching, crying out, "Jesus of Nazareth, what have we to do with thee? Thou hast come to drive us out. I know who thou art. Thou art the Holy One of God." But Jesus remained quite unmoved. He scarcely turned from his elevated position toward him, made only a menacing gesture sideways with his hand, and said quietly, "Be still, and go out of him." Thereupon the man, becoming silent, sank down, still tossed to and fro from the ground, and Satan departed from him under the form of a thick black vapor. The man now grew pale and calm, prostrated on the ground, and wept. All present were witness to this awful and wonderful spectacle of Jesus' power. Their terror was changed into a murmur of admiration. The courage of the Pharisees forsook them, and they huddled together, saying to one another, "What manner of man is this? He commands the spirits, and they go out of the possessed." Jesus went on quietly with his discourse. The man had been freed from the devil, weak and emaciated, was conducted home by his wife and relatives, who had been in the synagogue. When the sermon was over, he met Jesus and asked for some advice. Jesus warned him to refrain from his evil habits, lest something worse might befall him, and exhorted him to penance and baptism. The man was a cloth weaver. He made cotton scarves, their own light, such as were worn around the neck. He returned to his work perfectly cured in body and mind. Such unclean spirits often domineer over men that freely give themselves up to their passions. Side note, that's also said by many exorcists, but people seem to be ignoring exorcists these days. After this scene, the Pharisees were afraid to assault Jesus that day, so they remained quiet while he went on with his teaching. The lessons for the Sabbath were taken from Moses and Ozee. I'm guessing she means Hosea. There were no more interruptions, though Jesus spoke very forcibly and severely. His appearance, his words were much more impressive than usual. He spoke as one having authority. The instruction over, he went to Mary's where were gathered the women with many relatives and disciples. I counted all the holy women who were associated together till the death of Jesus to help the little community. There were 70. At this time, there were already 37 who took part in this duty. Sabia and Athaliah, also the daughters of Lais of Nain, were toward the last admitted among the female followers. At the time of St. Stephen, they were among the Christians who settled in Jerusalem. Saturday, November 11th. Next morning, Jesus again taught unmolested in the synagogue. The Pharisees had said to one another, "We can do nothing with him now. His adherents are too numerous. We shall contradict him now and then. We shall report all at Jerusalem, and wait till he goes up to the temple for Passover." The streets were again filled with the sick. Some had come before the Sabbath, and some till now had not believed. But on the report of the possessed man's cure, they had themselves transported thither from all quarters of the city. Many of them had been there before, but had not been cured. They were weak, tepid, slothful souls, more difficult to convert than great sinners of more ardent nature. Magdalene was converted only after many struggles and relapses, but her last efforts were generous and final. Dinah the Samaritan turned at once from her evil ways, and the Suphanites, after sighing long for grace, was suddenly converted. All the great female sinners were very quickly and powerfully converted, as was also the sturdy Paul, to whom conversion came like a flash of lightning. Judas, on the contrary, was always vacillating, and at last fell into the abyss. It was the same with the great and most violent maladies which I saw Jesus in his wisdom cure at once. They that were afflicted with them, like the possessed, had no will whatever to remain in the state in which they were, or again self-will was entirely overcome by the violence of the malady. But as to those that were less grievously affected, whose sufferings only opposed an obstacle to their sinning with more facility, and whose conversion was insincere, I saw that Jesus often sent them away with an admonition to reform their lives, or that he only alleviated without curing their bodily ills, that through their pressure the soul might be cured. Jesus could have cured all that came to him, and that instantaneously, but he did so only for those that believed and did penance. And he frequently warned them against a relapse. Even those that were only slightly sick he sometimes cured at once, if such would prove beneficial to their soul. He was not come to cure the body, that it might the more readily sin, but he cured the body in order to deliver and save the soul. In every malady, in every kind of bodily infirmity, I see a special design of God. Sickness is the sign of some sin. It may be his own or another's, a sin of which he may be conscious or not, that the sufferer has to expiate, or it may be a trial expressly prepared for him, which by patience and submission to God's will he may change into capital that will yield a rich return. Properly speaking, no one suffers innocently, for who is innocent, since the Son of God had to take upon himself the sins of the world, that they might be blotted out. To follow him, we are all obliged to bear our cross after him. Since joy in the highest degree of patience in suffering, since the union of pain with the passion of Jesus Christ belong to the perfect, it follows that a disinclination to suffer is in itself an imperfection. We are created perfect, and we shall again be born to perfection. Consequently, the cure of sickness is an effect of pure love and mercy toward poor sinners, a favor wholly unmerited by them. They have deserved more than sickness, they have deserved death. But the Lord by his own death has delivered them that believe in him and perform works in accordance to their faith, with their faith. So I saw Jesus on this day cure many possessed, paralyzed, dropsical, gouty, mute, blind, many afflicted with an issue of blood, in fine, violent maladies of all kinds. I saw him several times pass by some that were able to stand. They were those who had frequently received slight relief from him, but their conversion was not being earnest. They had relapsed in body and soul. As Jesus was passing by them, they cried out, "Lord, Lord, thou dost cure all that are grievously sick, and thou dost not cure us. Lord, have pity on us, we are sick." Again, Jesus responded, "Why did ye not stretch forth your hands unto me?" Why do ye not stretch forth your hands to me? At these words all stretched out their hands to him and said, Lord, here are our hands. Jesus replied, You do indeed stretch forth these hands, but the hands of your heart I cannot seize. Ye withdraw them and lock them up, for ye are filled with darkness. Then he continued to admonish them, cured several who were converted, slightly relieved others, and passed by, some unnoticed. That afternoon he went with all his disciples and relatives to the lake. There was on the south side of the valley a pleasure garden provided with conveniences for bathing, the water being furnished from the brook of Capernaum. Here they paused and administered baptism to the garden, or in the garden. The Blessed Virgin, with several of the women, along with them Dina, Mary, Lais, Athalia, Sabia, and Martha, went for a walk in the neighborhood of Bethsaida, a little beyond the lepers' asylum. A caravan of pagans was encamped thereabouts, and among them were several women from Upper Galilee. The Blessed Virgin consoled and instructed them. The women sat in the circle on a little eminence, and Mary sometimes sat, sometimes walked among them. They asked her questions, which she answered clearly, and told them many things about the patriarchs, the prophets, and Jesus. Jesus, meantime, was instructing a crowd in parables. The disciples did not understand him. Later, when again alone with them, he explained the parable of the sower. He spoke of the tares among the wheat and of the danger of pulling up the wheat with them. It was principally James the Greater who told Jesus that he and his companions did not understand him, and he asked him why he did not speak more clearly. Jesus answered that he would make all intelligible to them, but that on account of the weak and the pagans, the mysteries of the kingdom of God could not then be exposed more plainly. As even with such precautions these mysteries alarmed his hearers, who in their state of depravity esteemed them too sublime for them, they must at first be presented as it were under the cover of a similitude. They must fall into their hearts like the grain of seed, yes. In the grain the whole ear is enclosed, but to produce it the grain must be hidden in the earth. He explained to them likewise the parable referring to their own call to labor in the harvest. He insisted chiefly upon their following him. They would soon be with him always, and he would explain all things to them. James the Greater said also, Master, why wilt thou explain all to us who are so ignorant? Why must we publish these things to others? Tell them rather to the Baptist who believes so firmly that who thou really art. He can publish them. He can make them known. That evening, when Jesus was teaching again in the synagogue, the Pharisees, who could once more breathe somewhat freely, began to dispute with him on the subject of his forgiving sins. They reproached him with the fact of his having in Gabara said to Mary Magdalene that her sins were forgiven him, or her. And they asked how he knew that. How could he do that? Such talk was blasphemy. Jesus silenced them. Then they tried to provoke him to say that he was not a man, that he was God. But Jesus again confounded them in their words. The scene took place in the forecourt of the synagogue. At last the Pharisees raised a great cry and tumult. But Jesus slipped from their hands and into the crowd, so that they could not tell where he had gone. He went by the flowery dale back to the synagogue, to the garden of Zorobabel, and thence by roundabout ways to the house of his mother. He tarried there a part of the night, and sent word to Peter and the other disciples to meet him next morning at the opposite side of the valley beyond Peter's fishery, as he wished them to go with him to Nain. The centurion Cornelius and his servant asked Jesus what they should do. He answered that they and all their family should receive baptism. And so that concludes this reading. Alright, I have two observations. They're just anecdotes, though. So notice that she talks about Judas Iscariot vacillating, not able to maintain a proper uprightness. We have two major sins in our time: impurity and its spiritual twin, apostasy, which are especially difficult to fight. Now, of course, impurity, spiritual sin is idolatry, but apostasy is a form of idolatry, right? So impurity is a form of extreme clumsiness. I liken it to this. One day, I had to water my transplanted oaks to make sure they would survive the transplant. So I put water in a pot. I filled up the pot. Then I had to go down a set of stairs. So with a full pot, the water splashed about, and I'm spilling it here, spilling it there. By the time I get to those oaks, those sprouted oaks, half the water in the pot is gone. This is what apostasy is. This is what impurity is. It's a loss, but you don't feel yourself losing it. Rather, it's just spilling over from your routine day by day living, from your routine corruptions. Now, apostasy is like a sickness for the soul, which surely impurity is a sickness of the flesh, because losing your faith empowers your flesh, and you feel much greater intimacy towards the world when you're being impure. Like you feel a sense of belonging and validation, but something inside you is dying. You don't know it because it dies in pleasure rather than dying in pain. And this is why I think if you're able to win against impurity, if you're able to embrace poverty in this world, there is a greatness in you, because you're not fleeing from pain, but rather you're fleeing from pleasure into pain. But it's a hard thing for Jesus to cure, because impurity just doesn't cause you pain. So the second observation is about rhetoric. James the Greater asks, why are you using parables? And I bet when he got to Spain, he was using them all the time. I bet. I don't know this. When you're young and you struggle in English class, it's like you got to learn what symbolism is: metonymy, synecdoche, onomatopoeia, irony, puns, symbolism, hyperbole, alliteration, allusion, apostrophe, similes, metaphors. You don't know why. It confuses you. Why are people using these tools used by language arts? It's because of the imperfection of communication of language, though. And we're trying to communicate, but that's why I say James asked, but he probably caught on. The reason is quite simple. It's to surpass the prejudice placed in your mind by demons. If a prejudice knows that a predator is coming, it waits at the front door with a baseball bat or a shotgun in its hand. Rhetoric is knowing that the predator, or the prejudice, is waiting at the front door, and instead it chooses to come in through some window in the middle of the night. The devil does this. That's how the demons got in your house in the first place. So you have to kind of defeat it in the same way. Now, Jesus doesn't just bust down the front door. He knows. Even a prejudice can stop Jesus. So you have to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. So you use the rhetorical tools at your disposal: beauty, sweetness, subtlety. When we possess those things, we invade the heart without having to cross the prejudices of the mind. That's why Mary is so important. She is the rhetoric, the beauty, the wisdom. Christ is the substance of light that radiates through her. She's just the perfect crystal that carries it. So that's it. Ave Maria.